Ever catch yourself in the mirror and think, how on earth does my body hold its shape? Well,
Okay.
get ready to be amazed because today's deep dive is all about the cytoskeleton, that amazing inner framework that gives our cells their structure and strength.
Yeah, it's way cooler than it sounds.
Right. Forget bricks and mortar. This is like high-tech engineering on a microscopic level.
Absolutely. And most people don't realize how active and dynamic the cytoskeleton actually is. It's constantly adapting, rebuilding a real bustling city of protein filaments working behind the scenes.
Okay, you had me at bustling city. So let's start with the basics. What exactly is the cytoskeleton, and why is it so crucial to how our cells work?
Imagine a cell like, well, a busy city. You've got buildings, vehicles, people constantly on the move.
Lots of moving parts.
Exactly. The cytoskeleton is like the city's infrastructure. Roads, bridges, buildings, those essential support systems that let everything else function.
Without it, our cells would just be a jumbled mess.
Exactly. Chaos. No organization, no way to get anything done.
So what's this intricate network made of? What are the building blocks of this cellular city?
It all comes down to three main types of protein filaments, each with its own unique properties.
Different tools for different jobs.
Think of them as the building materials for our cells. We've got actin filaments, microtubules, and the stars of our show today, intermediate filaments.
Time to meet the crew. Let's start with actin filaments. What's their specialty?
Actin filaments are like the tireless workers, constantly moving and reshaping things. They're the smallest of the three.
Small but mighty.
Exactly. They're essential for cell movement, muscle contraction, all about change and adaptability.
So they're the reason we can move and groove. I like them already, but what about microtubules? What makes them stand out?
If actin filaments are the builders, microtubules are the transportation network. They create this intricate system of highways and roads throughout the cell,
Delivering goods all over the place.
precisely transporting essential cargo, like proteins and organelles, to their designated spots.
So we've got our builders and our intricate highway system, which brings us to the main attraction, intermediate filaments. What sets them apart in this microscopic city?
They're the heavy lifters when it comes to structure and strength. If actin filaments are always on the move and microtubules are busy transporting,
Intermediate filaments are holding it all together.
exactly, they provide that core strength and resilience, especially important for cells that experience a lot of mechanical stress.
Like skin cells, for example.
Exactly. Skin, muscle cells, they need that extra toughness to withstand all that stretching and pulling. And what's really fascinating is that they can actually assemble themselves without needing extra energy input from the cell.
Wow, that's amazing. So unlike actin and microtubules, which need the cell to expend energy to build them, intermediate filaments are just good to go.
It's a key difference. It's like having a building that assembles itself. And that self-assembly is what makes them so efficient.
Nature is so cool, but there's got to be more to it than just strength and self-assembly, right? They must have some specific jobs within the cell.
You're absolutely right. It's not one size fits all. Intermediate filaments are a diverse group, and their location within the cell really determines their function.
So where do they hang out?
We can broadly categorize them into two main groups, those found throughout the main part of the cell, what we call the cytoplasm.
The cytoplasmic crew.
Right. And then there's the nuclear lamins. These guys are found specifically inside the cell's nucleus.
Okay, so two main locations for these filaments. But how do they differ? Okay, so we've got these two main groups, our cytoplasmic filaments and the nuclear specialists. Let's start with those cytoplasmic intermediate filaments. What's their main gig inside the cell?
Think of them as the internal scaffolding, giving the cell its shape, its strength.
Well, wanting it all together.
Exactly. They're like this network of strong cables, helping cells withstand all the stretching and pulling they go through.
Especially important for cells that see a lot of action, like those skin cells we talked about.
Precisely. Without them, our cells would be pretty flimsy.
Like bursting at the seams. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, what about those nuclear lamins we touched on? Sounds like a pretty important job, guarding the cell's control center.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The nucleus is like the vault, right? It holds our DNA.
The blueprints for life.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And the nuclear lamins are tasked with protecting that precious cargo. They create this mesh-like structure,
Like a net.
protective barrier around the DNA. Think of it
A
like,
security fence around a top secret facility.
exactly, high security for our genetic material.
I like it. So we've got our city planners, our transport system, our steel beams, and our security detail. But I'm curious, within those cytoplasmic intermediate filaments, is it just one type for everything? Or are there different flavors for different jobs?
Oh, Definitely different flavors. There are actually several types, each one specialized for a particular cell type, a particular function. Like keratin, for instance, that's a type of intermediate filament we find in epithelial cells.
Wait, keratin, like what our hair and nails are made of.
That's the one.
So the same stuff that keeps our hair strong is also helping to hold our organs together.
Well, it's a bit more complex than that, but you've got the right idea. Keratin is a major part of skin, hair, nails. It provides strength, waterproofing.
Multi-purpose.
Right. But inside the body, keratin filaments create this strong interconnected network, helps epithelial tissue resist tearing, abrasion.
So it's like a protective lining for our insides as well as our outsides.
Exactly. It's all about creating that tough, resilient barrier.
Amazing. What other types are out there?
Another great example is desmin. We find that one in muscle cells.
Muscles, they're constantly contracting, relaxing, must need some serious reinforcement.
Exactly. Desmin is crucial for making sure muscle fibers maintain their structural integrity, even with all that constant action.
So desmin is like the ultimate gym buddy, keeping those muscles in tip-top shape.
That's a great way to put it. Without desmin, our muscles wouldn't be able to function properly.
Makes you appreciate those tiny filaments even more. Now, this whole self-assembly thing, I get the basic idea, but walk me through how it actually happens step by step.
Okay, so picture this. It starts with a single protein called a dimer. Now, these dimers, they're asymmetrical, meaning they've got a top and a bottom, like a little arrow.
Okay, so they're not perfectly balanced.
Right. But when two dimers get together, they line up head to tail, forming a symmetrical structure called a tetramer.
So it takes two to tango, they find their perfect match and create this balanced unit.
Exactly. And this tetramer, that's where things get interesting. They don't just line up in a straight line, they stack on top of each other, slightly offset.
Like a stack of logs where each one is shifted a bit.
Perfect analogy. That staggered arrangement is key for the strength and flexibility of the final filament.
So it's like a microscopic game of Tetris, but instead of disappearing, the blocks build this strong rope-like structure.
Exactly. That staggered stack, that's what we call a unit-length filament, or ULF.
Catchy.
And then, just like the tetramers, those ULFs, they connect end to end, creating that long, rope-like filament.
So we've got dimers pairing up to form tetramers, tetramers stacking into ULFs, and then the ULFs joining forces to create these incredible, strong filaments. It's like a perfectly coordinated dance.
And the coolest part, the whole thing just happens. No energy required from the cell, it's just spontaneous.
Talk about elegant design. Nature really knows what it's doing. Okay, I think I'm getting the hang of the self-assembly thing. It's amazing how these tiny proteins just spontaneously create these strong structures.
It's really remarkable, isn't it?
It is. But we've been talking a lot about these individual filaments, and I know there's more to the story. Don't they also, like, work together to build bigger structures within the cell?
Absolutely. Think of it this way. A single rope is strong. But what happens when you weave several ropes together?
You get something even stronger, obviously.
Exactly. Same idea with intermediate filaments. They don't just exist in isolation. They interact, they connect, they form these extensive networks.
So it's like weaving this microscopic tapestry of support throughout the cell. What's holding those filaments together?
Cells have these incredible structures called desmosomes. You could almost think of them as spot welds, connecting the intermediate filaments of neighboring cells.
Wow, spot welds. So they're literally linking the cytoskeletons of different cells together.
Precisely. It's like they have these tiny, strong buttons, creating a continuous network of strength and support across tissues.
So it's not just about individual cells being strong, it's about them being interconnected, working together as this larger unit.
Exactly. Desmosomes are absolutely crucial for tissues that go through a lot of mechanical stress.
Like skin, right? And muscles, too.
You got it. Skin, heart muscle, the lining of our gut, they all need that extra strength to handle constant stretching, bending, pressure.
Otherwise, we'd be falling apart. It makes you realize how important it is for these structures to be working properly. What happens when something goes wrong with these intermediate filaments?
Well, there's a group of genetic disorders, epidermolysis bullosa, or EB, that really highlights how crucial these filaments are. People with EB have mutations in the genes that code for keratin proteins, those specialized filaments we talked about earlier, so important for skin strength.
So their skin is missing those essential building blocks.
In a way, yes. Their skin's internal scaffolding is much weaker than it should be.
And that makes it much more fragile, I'm guessing.
Exactly. Because of that weakened scaffolding, their skin is incredibly fragile, prone to blistering, even from minor friction or rubbing. It's a really tough condition, painful, and often debilitating. And it really underscores how vital these intermediate filaments are.
It's heartbreaking, but it really puts things in perspective, this
Yeah,
intricate world happening at a microscopic level, and it's so essential to our health and well-being. We've covered so much ground.
we really have.
It's amazing from how these tiny proteins self-assemble to their role in connecting cells, forming tissues, everything. It's clear that intermediate filaments are absolutely essential for life as we know it.
They really are. And we've really only scratched the surface. There's still so much that scientists are discovering about these amazing structures. The cytoskeleton is involved in everything from cell signaling to wound healing, even cancer.
Wow. It's incredible to think that something as seemingly simple as a cell's internal scaffolding could hold so many secrets. Makes you wonder what other hidden wonders are waiting to be discovered, even in the tiniest parts of our cells. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the fascinating world of the cytoskeleton. For our listeners who are now as captivated by this as we are, remember, there's always more to explore.